I declare the Ordinary Council meeting of the 30th of May 2023 held in Council Chambers at the City of Subiaco open at 5:31pm. Welcome everyone. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the area. We recognise their cultural connection to the land and waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to our city. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and by being present at this meeting, members of the public consent to the possibility that their image and voice may be published online. Okay, attendances. We've got all elected members in attendance in person. We've got the whole of the executive leadership team here in person to assist us, and a number of staff members who will assist as needed, and we'll acknowledge them when the time comes. Any leave of absence requests this evening? Right. Okay, there were no previous public questions taken on notice and no public questions submitted this evening, so that brings us to public statement time. We've got statements on items C1, C2 and C5, so we'll begin with the statement on C1 from Marie Rack of Bedford Avenue.
My name is Marie Rack and I am a Subiaco owner-occupier residing at 57 Bedford Avenue, Subiaco, since purchasing the property in June 2000. In reference to the amended Local Planning Policy 7.2, refunding, reducing and waiving planning fees, I wish to record my experience with reference to this policy. Firstly, as an owner-developer who applied to renovate the existing dwelling at 57 Bedford Avenue in 2011 and navigating that process with the existing neighbours at that time. Secondly, I am experiencing being on the other side as a neighbour of the recently demolished Catholic Church at 55 Bedford Avenue, with a development currently being proposed next door. Third, my experience as a consultant who builds respectful workplace cultures through implementing respectful conversations. With our renovation in 2011, we developed the existing single-storey timber frame weatherboarded house built in 1904 by retaining the beautiful character and charm of the original house at the front and demolishing the rear. A new two-storey element based on sustainable principles was built in the middle third of the block. Every care was taken in keeping the existing home with minimal impact to the streetscape. You can barely see the extension from the front as the roof takes the same roof plane. On receipt of the early plans from the architect, we consulted with both immediate neighbours at that time who were grateful to be kept in the loop and included throughout the process. Interim agreement was gained informally through subsequent conversations as we progressed with our plans. Trust built along the way is all it takes to generate a relationship of mutual respect so that the planning process goes smoothly for all parties. Our current experience as a neighbour of the recently demolished Catholic Church with a development being proposed next door is entirely different. There has been no consultation from the applicant. Our experience, including the other surrounding neighbours, is one of being treated with disdain, without any dignity, common courtesy and respect. Personally, we've been presented with 10.5 metres of continuous 3-metre high parapet wall, creating an extreme overshadowing issue, and the excessive bulk and scale of the building is a mass of concrete and colour bond and doesn't resemble anything else in the street. The roof height contradicts all adjacent properties.
Press your button again and finish up, please.
My point is there continues to be no consultation or conversation, and this is after other development proposals have been rejected from the same applicant. It's a sad day when we have to offer financial incentives to talk to the neighbours. My concern moving forward is the sole intention of applicants whose business is being a developer is to make a profit. Refunding, reducing and waiving planning fees may be considered lunch money for some, so no behaviour change may occur. I would like to see a code of consultation be signed off on so that respectful conversations are mandatory.
Thank you. Just for the benefit of everyone else making statements, you'll get a warning beep at 2.5 minutes and your microphone will cut off at the end of your allocated 3 minutes. Okay, the next statement is from Hugh Richardson of Hilda Street on item C2.
Thank you. Mayor, councillors and staff, Hugh Richardson is my name. I'm a resident and ratepayer of Subiaco and have been for most of my life. Item C2 considers DWA's Princess Margaret Hospital DA. The documents are seriously substandard based on a series of reports that assert that DWA's decision is good. The 600 pages are not information. They are mainly data the reader must analyse to glean information. We laypersons do not have the specialty skills to tease out anything useful on which to decide. The data, selectively used by DWA in support of its case on water balance, claims 20 years of rainfall at core of its modelling on hydrology, that is, managing stormwater. 15 years data are missing from this basis. Rainfall data determines adequate on-site stormwater storage. Wrongly selected design data means excess will spill out onto Hamilton Street and Roberts Road, flooding in effect. Projected modelling for the site in the DA suggests this would have occurred 10 times since 2000. This misused modelling to affirm a preconceived result is based on an erroneous assumption of rainfall for the life of the development at PMH. I provided real records to demonstrate the water technology report is an example of errors in this DA. The likely outcome is the cost of restitution, and that will fall upon the residents and ratepayers of Subiaco. If the water balance report was rather obviously defective, it is no orphan. So is the traffic report, as it's based on 2020 records. Traffic records before and during the COVID shutdown and before traffic associated with Bob Hawke College all have dubious validity for a DA of this significance. The livability report has already been panned by education watchers. Something over 10,000 additional residents are mooted in the locality, with the closest primary school 1,200 metres away from this site. So it is a school already bursting at the seams, along with Subiaco School, Jollymont School, Rosalie School. The 770 square metres green heart in the middle of PMH is well short of the 13,000 square metres public open space government policy for a development of 2,000 new residents. These flaws are just some of the errors or omissions found.
Keep going, Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Matt. The two East Subiaco DWA developments interfere not only with the surrounding community, but with each other, worsening their individual impacts. What we have is yet another DWA, never mind the quality, feel the width. Please do not be misled by deceptive material in the DA and do not support it without a written indemnity of ratepayer protection from consequential costs. Subiaco still smarts, having lost badly under the Subiaco Oval MOU, which the Minister assured us was to be developed in good faith. Thank you for your attention.
Paul Clements of Barker Road, a statement on C2.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. I wish to make a statement on item C2, the Development WA referral for Princess Margaret redevelopment site. The statement is, this proposal shows 770 square metres of turf for the entire site. This exacerbates a chronic shortage of active open space in the Subiaco East redevelopment project. Development in the immediate area proposes 17,000 new people. The member for Nedlands, Katrina Stratton, has stated that councils are providing density requirement without reverting to the use of recreation reserves. She also states that it was never government policy to utilise recreation reserves for density development. As well, she states that recreation areas are in short supply and will only get far worse with development. Your council officers in the report state that, and I quote, public open space is insufficient for a development of this size and will place additional pressures on the already oversubscribed areas within the city. Further, the report states that the proposed public open space does not accommodate older children and teenagers. Why are these critical details not in the proposed resolution? And I believe you might talk about that later. They are the most critical parts of the whole development. Development WA has ignored its own consultation results in the Subiaco redevelopment. It has ignored requests from Subiaco Council. The former Premier Richard Court has damned the proposal, and I quote, as totally inadequate. The overdevelopment of Subiaco Overland Princess Margaret Hospital site. This comment comes from a highly respected Premier who has not made a political comment in 20 years. This proposal ignores various government policies and comes when there are a raft of first world health problems, from diabetes to a mental health crisis, costing the community billions of dollars. Kids are dropping out of sport because of lack of facilities, particularly women. Reports prepared by the City of Subiaco show provision of playing fields is inadequate. This plan has a raft of other issues, including no provision of primary school, which will be desperately needed in the near future. Council should request an urgent review of the master plan to demonstrate how density can be achieved without forcibly selling off recreation reserves.
Peter McDonald of Onslow Road, another statement on C2.
Good evening, Mayor, councillors and staff. My statement's in relation to the PMH Precinct Public Realm and Landscaping Works DA. The noise modelling in the application is based upon traffic volume growth of only 1.2% per annum over the 20-year period 2021 to 2041. On current plans, it is estimated an additional 17,000 residents will be accommodated in the general vicinity of the Subi Eastern PMH developments. And that 17,000 number, just to be clear, incorporates new residents in neighbouring cities, such as West Perth, but they're quite close to that precinct. A large number of these, or a large proportion of these new residents will have cars. It's difficult to imagine people spending the sort of money you have to spend to get an apartment inner urban, maybe $700,000, $800,000, and doing without a car. They can certainly afford one. The traffic volumes forecasts appear to be overly optimistic relative to the population growth figures, the transport trends, and the use of cars as a means of transport. If you look at the recent traffic problems we've had on Thomas Street going down towards the uni and towards the hospital, if you go down there about 7 in the morning, you'll see the traffic backed up almost all the way to Rockaby Road, That's a byproduct, I think, of some bad traffic planning. And my plea to you as councillors in your interface with DevWA is to try and achieve an outcome where we don't have bad traffic outcomes going forward as a result of this DA. Thank you for hearing me.
The final public statement is on item C5 from Jeffrey Dobb of Mearview Way.
Thank you. Mayor, councillors and staff, I'm Jeffrey Dobb of Mearview Way in Subiaco, where I'm an owner-occupier. I speak to agenda item C5, major land transaction at 2 Upham Street in Subiaco. In doing so, I note that the public notice period for submissions on the proposal to sell the former council depot has closed, with no submissions having been received. Neither the neighbours I've spoken to or myself were aware that submissions were open, perhaps the reason that no submissions were made, but it's also clear that there wasn't overwhelming public support to sell this land. The council officers report that the land is surplus to the city's requirements. However, the city's requirements include a need for green space, recreational space, and playing fields, for which there has been little new provision to meet population growth. There are several empty development sites within 1 kilometre of the old depot site, but none are as suitable for retention as green space as 2 Upham Street. The city's population projections see a 176% increase in the number of 0 to 16-year-olds in North Subiaco between 2021 and 2046. Where are these additional children to play, kick a football, and enjoy time away from their electronic screens? About half of Australian households have a pet. Where is the provision for additional dogs' exercise areas? Competent planning should ensure all the community's needs are met and not just consider each site or development in isolation. Need to remember that the old Subiaco commonage, it stretched from Thomas Street virtually to Subiaco Station. Much of this has been lost to much needed schools, playing fields with restricted access, and high-rise development sites. In an era of climate change, we need green spaces to minimise the heat sink effect of a built environment. I therefore urge that the city rezone 2 Upham Street to recreational and not sell it for development. This will play a part in fulfilling the city's strategic plan 2017 to 27 for parks, open spaces and public places, and specifically outcomes 2.1.6, best practice in the 2.2.1, a broad range of parks, open spaces and public places. This opportunity will not come again. Once sold off, it's gone forever. I ask the city and the council to show vision and retain 2 Upham Street for our children and grandchildren. It is a priceless resource with a value much greater than contributing to the rebuilding of council buildings. I thank you for your attention.
Councillors, before we go any further, I forgot to ask if there's any disclosures of interest this evening. Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. I, Angela Hammersley, wish to declare an interest in the following items, agenda items 13.1 and 13.2. The type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality,
pursuant to clause 22(2) of the Code of Conduct for council members, committee members and candidates. And the nature of my interest is I own a residential property at 24 Catherine Street, Subiaco.
Thank you. Any other disclosures? Okay, we can carry on. Okay, there were no petitions and approved deputations, so that brings us to confirmation of minutes of previous meetings. There's a single set of minutes, being those of the ordinary council meeting of the 18th of April 2023. A mover and a seconder to accept those minutes, please. Councillor Kosovich and Councillor White. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Okay, councillors, even though we're all physically here, we're going to be voting by show of hands because the technology is now set up for our new council chambers at Hay Street. So that brings us to announcements by the presiding member. And tonight's the last council meeting in these chambers, so look around because this is a situation which you probably won't find yourselves in again. As of next month, we'll be set up to hold council meetings in our new premises at 388 Hay Street. So before we get underway with the agenda, I just wanted to stop and pause and think about how much we've been doing lately. Since last month's OCM alone, look at what we've been up to. We've had Anzac Day, we've had an incredibly successful Subi Blooms. Now, initial estimates for that indicated that we might have had 90,000 people coming through in the course of Subi Blooms. That's yet to be verified, but what we do know is that there were tens of thousands more than previous successful events. We've had a citizenship ceremony at which 29 candidates representing 19 countries became Australian citizens. We've had the city's annual photographic awards, which has grown from only 28 entries in its first year to 699 entries this year. And we've made time for the little things as well, like the celebration of a new partnership with the Wandana Community Association. Between meetings, we've had important workshops on things like budgets and the future of the Crossways site, and even the future of this site here at Rockaby Road. Operationally, we've had the FOGO rollout, and we've also continued our move to the new premises at 388 Hay Street. So with the conclusion of tonight's meeting, I dare say that move will be almost complete. Now look around outside. The Seddon Street upgrades, which the city is doing in partnership with Blackburn, are underway, and so too are the upgrades to the Postal Walk. These are both improvements to the public realm, which the city hopes will create nodes of interest and cause people to visit our city centre and linger longer. That brings us to tonight's agenda. It's just as packed as the previous month's workload has been. We've got major land transactions, we've got a digital transformation that we're being asked to consider, and we've got important matters regarding 450 Hay Street and nearby Seddon Street. We've even got the CEO review, which is one of the council's most important annual tasks. So look, I think it's fair to say we've been remarkably busy, so it seems fitting that I should thank councillors and staff for keeping up the good work and for taking everything in your strides. I think the workload has crept up on us as the years rolled along, but we've barely broken a sweat, so well done to everyone. Well, council has, and I don't know about staff. Okay. Look, it's probably, I'll say one more thing, and I think it's fitting that we acknowledge that there's apparently a new Premier, Roger Cook. Yeah, so that's what my sources tell me. Look, this change of leadership comes at an important time for Subiaco. Here in our city, I think we need a state government who'll be willing to have a collaborative working relationship with local governments such as ourselves. Tonight's agenda items such as C2 and 13.2 are testament to this. So we wish Roger Cook all the best, and we hope to see him in Subiaco soon. I did meet Roger at the unveiling of our giant, and he seemed like a pretty decent guy. So I'm looking forward to seeing how he performs in his new role. Okay, so that's all the announcements. I think that's the end of the public part of the meeting. Well, yep. Reports of committees and officers. Okay, there's a number of items which might be handled en bloc. And the possible en bloc vote I've got in front of me at the moment would consist of items C1, C3, C4, C6 and C7, meaning no amendments or alternatives have been submitted in relation to those items. Councillors, did you wish to remove any of those items from the en bloc vote? Councillor Hammersley. Okay, C1 is out, leaving 4 items in the en bloc vote. C3, C4, C6 and C7 would be the en bloc vote. Okay, a mover and a seconder for the en bloc item, please. Councillor De Vries and Councillor Kosovich. All those in favour? The en bloc votes carried unanimously, and for those watching the meeting, that means that those items have been carried without debate. What's wrong? Okay, right. So we've had the vote for. All those against. The item's not carried unanimously. It's carried 8-1. Okay, item C1, draft amended local planning policy 7.2. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the officer recommendation? Councillor Hammersley, Councillor Stroud, seconding. Councillor Hammersley.
Yes, thank you. I asked for this to be withdrawn from the en bloc because we did have a community member who took the time to come in and speak to us about the matter, and I think it's deserving of recognition and perhaps a little bit of an explanation from some of us as to which way we're going to vote. So I am supporting the recommendation. However, I thought it's worth at least acknowledging that it is a little bit sad that we do have to give that we are giving financial incentives to have neighbours speak to their neighbours. However, it's something that we can do to improve community, and I think it's worth bearing in mind that look, often we do have people who've lived in their property for a number of years who redevelop, but sometimes we have people who have come from far and wide and find themselves buying a property in Subiaco and perhaps are not connected into the community. And I'm not saying that that's exclusively the circumstances in which we've met with some fairly sad situations where things end up in this room being debated when people haven't even spoken to each other, and often we find that if push comes to shove and they do start speaking, that some mutual solutions can be found. So I think it's a worthwhile thing to try. I have some misgivings myself about how it might operate, but those sorts of things, there's always risks, and I think it's not set in stone, so it can change. If it doesn't work quite as it is envisaged in the report, if people become confused and concerned, I have no doubt that the matter will either be brought back to the council by the staff or by an elected member because we're all pretty connected to voices in the community. So that's where I'm sitting. I'm going to support it on the basis, let's give it a go, because it's something that is a tangible support for the idea of community. Thank you.
Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and good evening. Firstly, I'd like to start my debate with a question. I note that the city rightly says, the staff rightly says, that there is a limit in the residential design codes for consultation and how we go about it, the terms of consultation. Our statement tonight put up the proposition of a code of consultation, and I wondered if that could fit into the terms or not. Thank you.
Manager Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So the officer's response to that question about the code of conduct was that the residential design codes is a limiting factor in what the city can do. So it can't go above and beyond what the R codes contemplates in terms of neighbour consultation. So this policy kind of sits outside of that before lodgement of the application. We will be preparing a information sheet which will accompany the policy and be placed on the city's website, which will give more guidance to neighbours and also to applicants on how to navigate that process and to encourage that discussion to occur. So it's not necessarily a code of conduct, and it's probably a bit outside of the consultation. Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Stroud, did you wish to debate the item now?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to bring out a few points about this. And it comes from some reflection of 12 years and observing particularly where it is a private developer of a home, which by far is the majority of development in Subiaco. Sometimes I feel they get so carried away with their plans and they come to us in front of us and say, this is our home forever. Our forever home for our family and children, and yet, surprise, surprise, they haven't even talked to their neighbours or their street or whatever to in which they want to settle in and no doubt become a part of that community. So, you know, just perhaps, we all think by a hip pocket, just perhaps this financial incentive will attract an attention to the importance of consultation and encourage people to talk to their neighbours. And you know, what a difference it has made over the years when we have asked our applicants to consider talking to their neighbours. We've often ended up with far better outcomes with a design build. I can even remember where we stopped a second story because of the impact on the neighbours, and the applicants in the end were just so grateful that we did. They said it was a far better outcome to actually their renovation to their home. This was in Richardson Street in Daglish. So that really is the intention. And as Councillor Hammersley suggests, you know, if things aren't working and they do need more of a tweak or whatever, we can always bring it back to council and, you know, just thrash it out a bit further. So I do recommend it to council to vote for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any speakers against? Councillor Jennings.
It's not actually against. I just have a question, if I may ask it. Thank you, Mayor, and through you. The comment to the statement, that officer's comment at the end of the statement, the printed out copies that elected members have been provided with, has the person who made the statement, was that provided to them prior to this? Okay.
Manager Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. No, it wasn't. I did speak to Ms. Rack about a month ago on the development application she spoke to. So we spoke in depth about, I guess, the limitations of the planning framework in that context, but we haven't provided the response to her yet.
May I ask another question, please? Thank you. I don't know where we got to. There was been discussion about whether or not to provide these responses to the makers of statements contemporaneously or at the time when they're making their statement, so that they have them. What happened to that idea, or is that still being considered or processed?
I understand they currently form part of the minutes of the meeting. CEO, is there a more in-depth answer that you can provide?
No, at present they form part of the minutes. We put them on the website, but certainly we can have a further conversation if elected members think that would be helpful. There are some time pressures around putting all this information together, so in some ways as well, it's just those comments are more for guidance for the elected members at that point in time, but we could have a further conversation.
Okay, so I'm looking for a speaker against. Okay, the debate doesn't need to go any further, but I'm happy to hear from any other elected members who want to speak. Councillor White.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you, just very briefly, I support the motion. I really, though, very much appreciate the public statement on the topic. I guess for me, it's we're wanting to change behaviour, we're wanting to encourage people locally to consult with their neighbours, and this is a useful one mechanism of doing that. I think for me, the public statement that I've heard is that this is possibly not the only one, and there could be other ways in which we could encourage this kind of consultation. So I'm very grateful for that input. I'm supporting the motion because I think it's a step in the right direction, but it seems to me it may not be the only step in the right direction, and I think we should be attuned to that and as we go forward. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Hammersley, did you want to close? I'll call the vote. All those in favour? Anyone against? The item's carried 8-1. Councillor Burns. Okay, the next item, C2, the Development WA referral for the landscaping works on the old PMH site. We've got an officer recommendation and an amendment submitted by Councillor Powell. So I'll start with a mover and a second for the officer recommendation, and then we'll look at the amendment. A mover and a seconder, please. Councillor De Vries and Councillor Kosovich. Councillor De Vries.
Yeah, I think this is really great that we're still having the opportunity to hear from the community and think how this development really is going to be one that will bring challenges to our community. So I want to thank Mr. Richardson and Mr. Clements and others who've been contacting me and obviously thinking through these issues very deeply. And I think this bespeaks to the incredible strength we have in our community, the incredible intelligence and the desire for the well-being of people who'll be here long after we're gone. And I think that is what is so interesting about this particular development. At least for me it is. And I should say at this point, yes, I will be voting in favour of it, but in my heart, I'm actually very sad that I have been put in this position. We know that it's definitely on the cards that it's going ahead, but it does have so many areas of concern. And I think what really does concern me about this is that there has been a really apparent lack of thinking about what kind of cities we're creating for our future. While we have Singapore and other leading European cities, and may I even say China, turning the corner in terms of the green type of builds that they're doing, the way they're creating green belts, where 500-metre green corridors are considered narrow, where buildings in Singapore now have green rooftops, where there is a real concern, and I think the figures I got out of Singapore, that they're aiming to reduce carbon emissions by 36% by 2030 by these, by doing work in how they build the inner city with, more green spaces. Singapore's really suffered from heat sink, and I lived there for 2 years and I never left the air conditioner off, ever. It was really hard going, and from anecdotes I know that it never used to be that hot. Putting a lot of concrete into a small area will increase the temperatures in that area, and I know that there are green spaces around it, and I'm absolutely sure that the best intentions are there to keep it down to a minimum. But we know these are complicated issues, and when I go online, there are just copious books being published on the green and blue belt cities that are being created across the world. So what I hope will happen as a result of this build going ahead is that some really fabulous, fantastic, innovative projects are put forward where our city, our community is a leader in green cities in Australia, because we need to do better. We are at the forefront of climate change. We know that 1.5 degrees target, it's going to be reached by 2050. I read reports last night that by 2100, our planet will be uninhabitable. We're not talking about just missing our green space. We're talking about having to make realistic choices about how we live, not just pushing forward and saying high density will solve the problem of everything. It does not. That is so one fits all kind of thinking. I know we can do better. We only need to go into a catalogue of fabulous resources, fabulous insights and research to know that we could turn this into something better. So that's my hope. I'm sorry that our community hasn't got the best outcome, and we know that we've pushed for it in whatever way, but this has disappointed me. But when I say I'm voting for it, I probably will be supporting the amendment put forward. That's definitely the case, but I will be supporting that when it comes to hearing from my fellow councillor, because it's that amendment does add in these important points. Thank you.
Councillor Kosovich.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. A question with notice to staff, please. There remains critical concern by some in the community as to the adequacy of the city's submissions on the issue of active open green space in the planned redevelopments of the PMH and Subi Oval sites. Accordingly, could staff provide a short summary of the city's submissions to Development WA in relation to these developments, please? Moreover, what assurances are we able to provide to the community that there has been sufficient consideration and adequate planning and all of the related matters, and that there will not be a shortfall in recreational and open green space for the city's soon-to-be burgeoning population when these two major projects take effect in the coming years?
Director of Development Services.
Thank you for your question, and through you, Mayor. So, great question. This, the planning and design for the Subiaco East redevelopment area has been occurring over a number of years, and that has primarily been driven by Development WA. Prior to that, Council had endorsed its own Kitchener Common Master Plan and had undertaken a review of public open space, which determined, as we all know, that there's a lack of active open space in Subiaco East and more broadly in inner city areas. So that position was then provided to the state government. However, the state government continued on with its planning through the MRA and Subiaco redevelopment scheme. From there, planning control was taken away from the city and planning undertaken by Dev WA. And while I understand that there is quite a lot of public open space in Subiaco East, there is a shortfall of active open space. And with an increasing population, this will be further exaggerated. Subiaco Oval did provide some temporary relief in that. However, as more population comes, there would be a greater amount of people. So need to be more public open space. The city updated its future sports space requirements report. So that was a Cardno report, and it was then updated by GHD, and all those findings were shared with a number of state government agencies. This includes Development WA. It also includes relevant ministers, shadow ministers, I can say now former Premier, and everyone on multiple occasions. At all meetings that City has had, and even included in its submission on the master plan, we have very clearly stated that there's a lack of public open space for active playing fields. However, what it looks like is that Subiaco Oval will be the main active playing space available to be shared by the city and two other parties, Bob Hawke and the Football Commission for now. And there may need to be other opportunities explored to engage with other partners for additional public open space. So the city has made its position clear. It is a common issue. However, final development and planning control rests with the state government, and I guess we can continue to advocate for that on any ground that we may have. Thank you.
So Councillor Kosovic, you've seconded. Did you want to speak to the item? Any speakers against? Councillor Hammersley, question?
Just to follow on from that information, I think there's a bit of a crossover between this item and the public statement that we had about our major land transaction. And I just wondered if we could just ask, because we're talking about all of the efforts we've had over a lot of years looking at this issue of active playing fields and considering sites. So could we have any information the staff can give us about why the process that's happened, and perhaps why we're not really looking at that land for that purpose? Or should I wait? I don't know.
I prefer if we waited to hear questions on C5, but it's a good point you make that the issues are somewhat linked. But maybe we'll just get past C2 first. Let's test Councillor Powell's amendment. We'll have Councillor Powell moving, and I'll be looking for a seconder for the amendment. Councillor Hammersley. Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Look, I wasn't initially thinking about speaking in a great deal to this because, as we've heard, we've said it so many times before. And then I thought, well, maybe if we just say it one more time, maybe somebody maybe some decision maker is going to listen, somebody in the power. So look, I'm going to go through it again. Look, in my amendment, I make specific reference to the report on the future requirements for sports space as commissioned by the city, and it was published only a little over a year ago. So it's certainly a current document, and I want to highlight a couple of points in that document. The age group with the highest participation rates, 85%, are those aged between 15 and 18. Now, that's not surprising. It may be in part a reflection of school sports. But just as importantly, more than 60% of every other age group, with the exception of the over 65s, participated in some form of sport or physical activity, and even for the over 65s, it's just under 50%. So I think everybody knows that physical activity is vital to our health and well-being, and look, everybody knows it. The report makes clear that we're one of the most dense population areas in the state. We're looking at about a 40% population increase in a dozen years' time, and yet little provision is being made for more active open space. And Subi East and the PMH site is one of the few remaining areas where it may be possible to get some playing fields. The Department of Planning has recognised that there's a standard need of 6.5 square metres open space per person in urban areas, but what we're heading for is an inadequate 4.2 in about a dozen years' time. And it's not just the lack of playing fields and the growing intensity of competition for access to the ones that we do have. It's that it puts further stress on our existing playing grounds and subsequent higher maintenance costs just to keep them in any sort of fit condition. And look, as has been pointed out by speakers from the gallery tonight and by our own officers, it's not as if all of this isn't known by Development WA and the state government. As one of the speakers here tonight said, our state member for Medlands, Dr Katrina Stratton, has raised the issue in state parliament, pointing to the lack of playing fields in the western suburbs, especially in regard to the insufficient space to meet the growing number of females engaged in field sports. I think, the decision makers, the people making this decision, have got to acknowledge that the world is changing. We now have professional women's cricket, AFL, soccer. Where are the juniors for these swelling ranks of female athletes supposed to train? Do we want to see even more division due to the competition over limited facilities? Look, the need for playing fields was also recently acknowledged by the Minister for Planning in her decision not to rezone the Christchurch playing fields. So all of this is so well known in the community and in the government. And it's not just the playing fields either. I think we know it's the lack of planning for schools and where's things like social housing component at the PMH site. Look, we still have an opportunity for a good outcome, but that's fast fading. And so I think perhaps what we need is redevelopment, not driven so much by the desires of State Treasury, but a good and orderly planning that meets the needs of the community. And that's really what I'd like to see. Thank you.
Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. I support the amendment because I think it doesn't hurt to restate what we have said many, many times before, and also to remind people in the community that have forgotten or who've come late to the debate that we have actually been doing that work all along, because sometimes it's suggested that we haven't, and we have. So I'm supporting it because I think it's just worth chipping away. Things do change, as we have seen this week, suddenly and very surprisingly. And there's always hope. That hope is fading very fast though, because we know that the Subiaco Oval reserve lands that have been public lands for hundreds of years are about to be sold and developed. And I think it's very sad. I think it's very short-sighted. However, this body and our community have no power and no say in that. And all we can do is just keep popping up and saying, don't forget, this is what you're doing for our future residents who are probably our children's grandchildren. And I just think it's very sad, so I'm going to support restating it. Thank you.
Any other speakers to the amendment? Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Powell, for writing up this amendment and speaking to it so eloquently as you do, pointing out all the issues. It just seems so obvious to me when you look at the maps, such as page 19 of our agenda, where you have Lot 1 and or Lot 2 sitting between the centre of this development and Perth Modern School. It's such an obvious site to provide more playing fields for a school, for district sport and so on. I think it's a pity that now, upon reflection, we didn't sort of challenge. We've just sort of accepted what are the development lots, and therefore we're commenting on what are the landscaping areas. We've wisely picked up that there's no consideration of teenager recreational space. And here we have one or both of these lots, so obviously a good location. to provide more active and passive open space. Anyway, I do commend the Councillor Powell's amendment to you. Thank you.
Any other speakers to the amendment? I will call the vote on the amendment. All those in favour? Okay, the amendment's carried with the support of 8 votes, and it looks like Councillor Burns is not presently in the chamber. So we've now got the officer recommendation as amended by Councillor Powell's amendment. Let me just check who's spoken. Okay, happy to open it up for anyone who wants to speak to the amended item. Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Mayor. And I believe anybody can talk again to the substantive motion after it being amended. I just want to raise the fact that it suddenly occurred to me, and this comes from experience of Subi Centro, whether this new landscaping plan by Development WA was resilient to skateboard use. It's certainly been a problem in other areas, and so I shot this idea off to staff this afternoon, and I thank them for their prompt reply, because from their reading as well, they didn't see that this had been considered. I've also forwarded this email to you all so you could have a little look at it. The staff suggests that we put it up as an advice note to Condition 7. I'd actually prefer to make it part of Condition 7. With one change, it reads that in relation to Condition 7, Development WA is encouraged to consider making hard infrastructure skateboarder resilient. I'd actually say skateboard resilient, because a skateboarder is the person who rides the skateboard. Thank you, Mayor. I wonder if we could actually make this slight amendment, and whether you could call a seconder to it. Thank you.
Yeah, look, why don't we, the quandary I'm facing, Councillor Stroud, is that I thought you were speaking to the item, and then I think you've moved an amendment under probably Rule 2.4 for the purpose of improving what's been written in the officer report. So maybe the thing to do is see if the mover and the seconder of the substantive motion are happy to take that on notice, and then we won't need to debate it. So that would be Councillor De Vries and Councillor Kosovic. Are you both happy enough with the amendment that Councillor Stroud's described? Governance, did you catch enough of that to put it up on the screen for councillors to have a look at? Okay, well, look, the mover and the seconder are not supportive, so Councillor Stroud, speak to the amendment, explain it a bit more, and, well, actually, don't debate it, explain it a bit more, and then we'll see if there's a seconder for it.
Thank you, Mayor, and perhaps staff could further expand on this too to understand, but my understanding of skateboard resilient is it stops skateboarders jumping onto furniture, and railings and any sort of infrastructure around the park, and it stops them usually by having little metal chips placed and so on. And by doing that, it stops the damage that we've all seen around parks by skateboarders, where they chip the edges of furniture, they chip the edges of steps, of various concrete, sometimes sculptures, and so on. So that's what we're talking about by making the hard landscape infrastructure skateboard resilient. It's well accepted in the industry, and it is being done. We just didn't, and we've had to go back and do it at Subiaco, at the China Green, Australian Fine China site at our own expense. So it'd be preferable.
Councillor Stroud, I might just stop you there and see if there's a seconder for your amendment. Councillor Hammersley seconding. Okay, Councillor Stroud, you can debate the amendment.
Thank you. Yes, this can be done. At our expense, we had to go back to or the Australian Fine China site area, which was developed up by Subiaco Redevelopment Authority, and install it ourselves at our own expense. So this, as I said, I prefer a condition, but advice note is better than nothing. And it will at least alert everybody to the consideration of this, so it doesn't become our expense down the track. Thank you. And if I can just ask you, thank you through you, Mayor, if the staff have anything to add in terms of skateboard infrastructure. Thank you.
Well, I'd be concerned about staff entering into the debate about this. Maybe just frame it as a question if there's something that you're unsure about that staff might be able to elaborate on. Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. Yes, I understand the point. It's just usually little nibs of metal on long walls to stop skateboarders railing in public areas. I think it's worth mentioning. They may or may not have picked it up themselves in due course anyway. Everything we say is just our input. We have no control over what ultimately happens, but I don't see any problem with suggesting it.
Director of Development Services, can you explain the difference between resistant and resilient furniture? I understand the proposal that's come across the bench is that resistant might be a better word than resilient. So maybe if you could just clarify that for us, please.
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Mayor. Look, thank you for sending the email through, Councillor Stroud. When I did receive it, the word said resilient, and we took that as to mean as to encourage people who skateboard and to use materials in ways that if someone was to skateboard on it, it actually wouldn't it wouldn't impact on that material. And that's something that has been absolutely successful at Bob Hawke College, which is why I thought that that's what you were going for. That's very different to skateboard resistant. So with resilient furniture, you might have things and materials that are curved. So if skateboarders and people use them, they can do so in a fairly safe way that doesn't damage it. Resistant is a big, it's different. You actually put things to discourage people from doing it, and it has a different connotation to the community and people using it. So I just recommend council be clear on whether it'd like to encourage the FWA to either try to stop the skateboarders or try to do it in a way where skateboarding might be okay and it doesn't damage the furniture.
Sorry, can I just clarify something? Skateboard resilient furniture creates structures that can be skateboarded upon. Is that correct? Whereas skateboard resistant furniture prevents the skaties from coming along. Councillor Stroud, are you happy with the change in terminology?
Yes, I must admit what was on my mind was resistance, although I'm happy we can have both resilient and resistant furniture. It's quite possible to do both because as it is, we don't have a lot for young teenagers to do. They can do a combination of. They can use furniture where it's appropriate, and at least it will be resilient, and perhaps that will keep them away from the other infrastructure, which isn't. And if that also has resistant features, well, that's a good thing, so let's just include both words. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Stroud, we're trying to vote on an amendment, so could you articulate how the amendment would read?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So in relation to condition 7, Development WA is encouraged to consider making hard infrastructure skateboard resilient or resistant.
It's a little bit unorthodox, but Councillor Hammersley, you've already seconded the amendment. You don't have any concerns about the change in terminology? Okay, does anyone else wish to speak to the amendment? Councillor Kosovich.
I thank Councillor Stroud for her clarification of that, resilient or resistant. Either way, I support both. I see the practical application of that, and I have no trouble supporting that as well.
Anyone else before we vote on the amendment? Councillor White.
My concern is about, I'm with the motivation, I'm concerned about the ambiguity, to be honest. I like the idea of resilience more than resistant, especially when we're saying we want teenager space there. I understand where Councillor Stroud's coming from. I just feel like what we're coming up with now when we're putting both words together with an or in between is somewhat ambiguous. So I'm struggling to be clear. We're giving direction to Development WA to do what on this, do both. And it just seems like a rabbit hole we're going into that I'm not sure we're being clear about. Again, it's not about disagreeing with the motivation. I'm just really not sure we're getting there.
Okay, so at present you'd be, well, I suppose you've just spoken against the amendment in its current form. I mean, I don't like drafting these things on the fly, but might I suggest that we add the words as appropriate at the end of the advice note? Councillor Stroud and Councillor Hammersley, how would you feel about that? Any other speakers to the amendment? Councillor De Vries.
Sorry. I don't oppose, interesting ideas, but I really do feel that the ambiguity in this will not be of assistance to anyone who reads it, because they will come back with the question, what do you want? Do you want resilient furniture, or do you want resistant furniture? So I think if Councillor Stroud wishes to make this advice note, she'd be best to make a choice, and then I might support it. Thank you.
Okay, any speakers for? We'll take that as another speech against. Any speakers for the amendment? Councillor Jennings.
Actually, no, I'm not for. So, well, I don't know what my position is at the moment, but I just want to make a comment. So, don't
That's
know
fine. I think we can just take speakers in the order they come now.
Thank you, Mayor. I note that when we were talking about the Seddon Street redevelopment of the open space there, I don't know whether we put a note in about for staff to try and design things that discourage skateboarding on the furniture, but and other places where that could happen. Not because we wanted to discourage teenagers or anything per se from using the space, but it was a noise issue that it's all right, maybe during the day, but then you get shift workers as well who might be sleeping. They're very noisy, and that was besides damage to, the hard infrastructure. We were also considering, I think, the noise factor when people come in and there's a skateboarding environment and they use it and they can use it late at night as well, which is probably not ideal. So I'll probably support the putting in that advice note, but it's just that I think that whilst we want to encourage teenagers, we don't want them to be noisy late at night skateboarding. And anyway, it may not be teenagers. There's lots of adult people who skate and use those facilities. So it's probably not likely to be teenagers. It's probably likely to be people older than that out and about late at night doing that. Thanks.
Any other speakers to the amendment? I'll call the vote on the amendment. All those in favour? All those against? The amendment's carried 5-4. Councillor Stroud, you were speaking before, and then you've raised an amendment. Did you want to finish the debate on C2? Any other speakers on C2 as amended by Councillor Powell and Councillor Stroud? Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Look, I'd just like to take up a point raised by one of the people from the gallery earlier tonight. That's former councillor and engineer Hugh Richardson, and his concerns over the water technology report. Look, I think anybody who's familiar with his work for Lake Julbup recognises he has some knowledge and expertise in hydrology. So, look, I wouldn't likely dismiss his concerns, and look, I'm sure staff haven't either. One of the fundamental concerns is about the water technology report is about the adequacy of the rainfall data that forms the basis of this report. In Mr Richardson's view, the report understates the average rainfall, and he has provided charts to support his contention. This site contains considerable areas of impervious surface, leading to unease that are higher than average rainfall, may result in the site being unable to contain the runoff. This is especially the case in case of a weather event, which there's concern that it may lead to flooding of areas outside the redevelopment. So look, really all I'm doing is I'm urging staff to consider the documents Mr Richardson has provided when they're going forward with assessments on the PMH redevelopment, and seek to let DWA know that it'll be responsible for any mitigation drainage works in the city if that come as a result of runoff from its redevelopment of the PMH site. Thank you.
Any other speakers to C2? Councillor De Vries. You moved, so no, you can't. Any other speakers? Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor McMullen. I can't even tell if this is for or against, but I'll speak anyway. I think what's important to understand here, and is arguably perhaps not fully acknowledged or considered by Development WA, is all these matters. Council, is that me? I don't know. I haven't got a piano here, but maybe. What has been raised by Councillor Stroud, Councillor Powell, it's a reference to Mr Richardson, etc. And the fact that Subiaco is invited to comment as to the statutory processes and what's going on. But we're invited to comment along with pretty much everybody. Now, a lot of instrumentalities are especially invited, Watercorp, etc. And then also it's put out generally to the public, so individuals or organisations, whether it's a school across the road or anybody else, can comment, and they all do, or some don't, but in the main, the comments in these matters are extensive. What's sort of sad or inappropriate about it is that we're grouped in with everybody, statutory, as I said, statutory organisations, individuals, etc., etc., etc. The difference is in the matters, particularly what's just been raised in the last couple of minutes, Councillor Stroud and Councillor Powell's matter on behalf of Mr. Richardson, is that these are ongoing issues, okay? And what is really, I don't believe, given enough due respect, is that once, well, right now it's Development WA, but let's just look back in time to the MRA, is that once they're done with it, right, they have this wonderful word called normalisation, which basically, in my definition, is they just shove it back to us, and it's now our problem to solve. So if it's damage from skateboarding, if it's flooding issues that we anticipated and then they weren't dealt with properly, there's no recourse to Development WA. It's just ours. You know what I mean? They build it, we get it. Now, if this was, for instance, Nigel Satterley building some 3,000 houses out, on the edge of town someplace, there is recourse. You know what I mean? What he's doing as an individual, right? You know what I mean? There is recourse to him. I'm not going to go into the depth of it, okay? But in this particular case, it's just like, okay, well, we're finished. And sometimes they're almost nearly finished. We were very close to having Subiaco normalised, even though there were several properties that still hadn't been, finished off, but they were going to normalise it anyway because there was such little land left. But then what happened is the Bob Hawke issue came along, the Oval came along, PMH came along. So in essence, the Subiaco, what was once called the Subiaco Redevelopment Authority, came within an inch of its life of not existing, and then new life was bred into it. And Landcorp and the MRA were amalgamated under Development WA, and which is an interesting process because one was arguably profit-based and the other one wasn't, which is a funny marriage to make. But it happened. So I'll just finish with this. All I'm really saying is, and I don't think there's anything we can do about it. They're not going to change legislation, as they've. But I'd just like to say, arguably, the city. Arguably, the city has just not shown enough respect. I'm not saying we deserve more respect than others and the opinions of others, but everybody else that puts in a report, Watercorp and everybody else, they don't get landed with. This is not dropped on them later on. The people that write in that support it or don't support it, they're all. It's all over for them. The only group that it's not over for is us. Okay, and it happens years down the track, but it does happen, and I'd just like to add that, and I think it's food for thought, and it just reflects upon the comments that have been made prior to me speaking. Thank you.
Any other speakers on C2? Okay. No, you haven't spoken to the substantive motion.
Look, I am going to support the amended proposal. There are people who are in the community who are of the view that we just shouldn't engage because, you know, we don't get given due respect and we don't get listened to. However, I don't think that that is the best way to go. We have very little influence, but to the extent that we have some, we should try and exercise it in the best interests of the community going forward. And to the point well made by Councillor Burns about inheriting this, and we see that with the mess down in Hood Street in the Woolworths site every day. We've inherited that mess, and how we're ever going to fix it, who knows. But, you know, the staff have picked up on that point and have made the point in the work that was presented to us that we are going to inherit this, and that there should be due regard given to the fact that we have to maintain it all for the next 100 years once it gets handed back. So I think it is important to try and have an influence as best as we can, and hope that our community understands that that's what we're doing, and that does not in itself say that we agree with everything that's happening or happened or going to happen, but that we are trying to sensibly improve things if we can. And I think that's what this work does, the combination of the work done by the staff and the elected members who've brought the amendments. So that's me. Thank you.
Okay, I didn't see anyone else wishing to speak, so I'll ask Councillor De Vries to close.
When cities worldwide are increasingly exposed to intensified climate impacts, it might be time to reflect that the kind of urban infill that we are experiencing needs careful planning and really deep consideration. In the last decade, there is mounting evidence that we need an evidence-based approach to adapt to climate change. This is the time for our decision makers to put their serious thinking caps on at Development WA. These are big decisions. What they do going forward and how they propose to make this a living space for the next few generations will impact on the well-being of our community. It will impact on school children. It will impact on so many aspects which have all been covered tonight. I want to thank Councillors Powell and Stroud for their amendments. This brings to the fore the strength of this council, its collective voice against the loss of active and passive open spaces is something that we have reiterated time and time again in the time that I've been on council. It is difficult to make a decision where we know that we have little power or influence. So while I will give my voice to support this tonight in going forward, I do hope that the decision makers do put their serious thinking caps on. Our new Premier, with his background in health, really considers the long-term health impacts of any future infill decisions. Thank you.
I'll call the vote. All those in favour of C2? The item's carried unanimously. Brings us to C5, a proposed major land transaction in relation to 2 Upham Street. We've got the officer recommendation, no amendments or alternatives, but this item requires an absolute majority. So I'll be looking for a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Mover and a seconder. Councillor Burns and Councillor Jennings. Councillor Burns.
I'll just, okay. I wasn't expecting to move, so you've got me off guard, but I was a little surprised. Look, with the greatest respect to the speaker, I'm sorry, the gentleman's name escapes me. I know he's still here with us, and his comments with regards to there does seem can't think of the word, but some issue with the fact that we're screaming about public open space and we have vacant land that we're not using and we're going to sell it, and we haven't even considered. It's given me a twinge of guilt in that thing. That doesn't mean, at the same time, that is an appropriate piece of land to retain for public open space by size and value and location, etc. It sits it's very close to the Henderson Fields, which are not part of Subiaco, but are right across. You could throw a stone to them. So I am going to put the sale to you, and I will leave it at that until I summarise. So I'll put it to the seconder. Thank you.
Councillor Jennings, do you wish to speak? Councillor Hammersley, you raised a question about C5 earlier. Did you want to resurrect that?
Yeah, I think I will, because look, this transaction's been through a very long process. It's something that was happening before my time on council, so I'm pretty sure that these issues have actually been considered. But I would like to hear. We did get a little bit of information about this in the comments, which the public haven't seen yet, but they will see. It's a little bit, I know these are done very quickly, it just says it may be suboptimal for locating playing fields, because I think we're all talking about playing fields. So I think a little bit of information about why. I think it's more than maybe. I think perhaps it is suboptimal, but I'd like to hear. Thanks.
Director of Development Services. All right, Director Corporate Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Yes, there were some comments provided earlier today, which was a collaborative effort between various of the officers at this table. There are a number of considerations. I think that Councillor Burns referred to some of that. So, we certainly do agree, and it is highlighted in our strategic community plan that it is important for us to provide a broad range of parks, open spaces and public places. At the same time, it's noted that the land in question is within 120 metres of Henderson Park, which provides a number of playing fields, and Mabel Talbot Reserve to the west as well. It's also adjacent to Subiaco Common, so it is quite proximate to a number of green spaces in the vicinity, including Henderson Park, which comprises a number of playing fields. Further to that, I think that the land itself constitutes less than 1 hectare of land, and when we looked at the dimensions of that land briefly, it did not look to be optimal in terms of locating playing fields, in terms of the size of playing fields that you'd like to be able to have. In addition, if you were to have playing fields there, you'd also need to give consideration to access, parking and amenity issues. The other thing is that it is freehold land, and when we do have freehold land, we have a responsibility to provide for financial sustainability of the city, and to make sure that we can maintain downward pressure on rates. So it is prudent where it's possible to realise the value of freehold land, and especially where there are alternate locations for the provision of community assets. It then means that those funds that we obtain from selling such freehold land can be put towards developing, renewing and maintaining desired community assets, preferably on Crown land, or alternatively reinvested into revenue generating assets. I think that's about all I will say on that one. Yep, go for it.
CEO.
Maybe if I can jump in, because our planning team are chomping at the bit to add something about the local planning strategy, no doubt. But one of the other elements relating to that, they'll talk about in terms of targets for infill, that this is required. And in addition to that, obviously we welcome new residents and on that site if it was to be developed, including new rates as well. So there's an ongoing revenue stream in addition to the sale price. I'll hand over to the Director of Development.
Thank you, and through you, Colin. Everything that has been said by the CEO and Director of Corporate Services is absolutely correct. The only other context that I can provide is that in the local planning strategy for this site, it was identified as an area where we were looking for increased development and infill, and also it's actually identified as a key development site in our local planning strategy. So that all fits into the picture of our dwelling targets and infill. However, what the strategy also does is establishes that green link that connects a Subiaco common or commonage, and that's actually already been protected and provided for. So this proposal is consistent with the city's local planning strategy and the general development framework around that.
Question? Councillor De Vries.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. This is because it's mentioned in the report that there is some possible contamination. Is there anything further we might say about that, or is that something that you have nothing more to say on? Thanks.
Manager Commercial Services and Property.
Thanks for the question. Through the Mayor, yes, there is still a memorial on the title. It is still a classified site as possibly contaminated, remediation required. So we have been through a remediation process. We've lodged the report with the Department of Environment, and they've come back to us to confirm that they're happy with the works that have been undertaken, that the works have been undertaken in accordance with the department's guidelines on site remediation, but they have requested, as a matter of good order, that we do some final groundwater testing before they're prepared to reclassify the site. So we've put the order in with our environmental consultant, and we're hoping to get that underway in the next couple of weeks. So assuming all goes well, we should get that reclassification in the next few months.
Any speakers against C5? Councillor De Vries.
Sorry, this is not really speaking against, but it's speaking to the very importance that was raised by our community member who came in tonight to speak about the fact that he'd been unaware that this had been an issue on, there was a period of public notice, and at that time was the opportunity when submissions could be made. And this really comes to the heart of my concern, I think, around the fact that when important issues for our community are not something that they're aware needs to be noticed, they may not go about looking for it on a website or in a newspaper or in an update. And yet when they find out that they missed that opportunity to have a chance to share their views, which are no doubt really valuable because, as we heard tonight, some really great points were made, but they may also open up further discussion and understanding about important issues. So whilst tonight my decision might be to support the sale because it has been long planned for and it is part of a strategy that we've had in place, I am disappointed that the views of our community are often not heard simply because they do not know that they have the opportunity to be heard. But let me say, Subiaco is not at fault for that. Participating in local government or in local decisions is really difficult across Australia. And there have been trials for how to improve that in other councils in South Australia. They created panels where they're 200 to 300 members of the community had a chance to hear when decisions were coming in advance. This is just simply to raise that issue. I'm really happy that we have people come in and speak, and they should be listened to. And obviously, in this case, that opportunity in March for the 6 weeks when submissions could be made was lost. at no fault of our own, but perhaps like many councils across Australia, we can look at new ways to make the community just a little bit more aware of when things come to important issues. And the problem is, obviously, the community do not spend all their time reading council agendas and doing what we're doing and then going and checking websites. This is something that the community just won't do. And this is not just common to Subiaco, it's Australia-wide or even global. So that's something I just wanted to address, and again to thank our members of the community who take the time to take an interest in important issues. Thank you.
Any other speakers on C5? Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just as a point of transparency, I met with our resident Jeff Dobb yesterday morning to talk out his views on the development of this site. And I did my best to present the site with all the sorts of issues that have rightly been raised this evening. But I did leave saying that I would I would still consider if there was some possibility of working up this site in terms of a green space. So, or some sort of park lane. So, the first thing I thought about was, is this a reasonable suggestion in light of its location? And it is on a couple of ways, because the Subi Common is now, particularly at particular times of the day, bursting at the seams because of all the infill of the fine china site. And so we have a pretty mad combination of kids trying to kick a ball, which is great, and lots of people with dogs and so on, all emptying into this very small area. And thank you, CEO, for taking the trees out of the centre of it and thereby reducing the space. And then I thought of its location. Yes, it is very close to Henderson and Mabel Talbot Park, but we are also very limited in our active open space, which has very much been raised this evening. So then I looked at the site and thought, well, is this appropriate for active open space? Nearly 10,000 square metres. It could probably make 2 small soccer fields. Junior? No, I get it. No, I get a shake of head from the CEO, so maybe it'd just make 1 big soccer field. But then I thought of parking. And certainly you couldn't do both. And parking would suddenly become a big issue in that area. And boy, we've had parking issues in that area. No, it could not ever be an active open space, which I believe is our greatest need. So that leaves the possibility of it being parkland. Pretty expensive choice for freehold land, because we have for many years been talking about selling that site to help cover our infrastructure. Yes, we've put it up as potentially to cover our administration building, but if it's not our administration building, it may well be a future Lord's. And in that, Lord's actually, with all its very active indoor space, with the courts that it provides, with with volleyball, basketball, soccer, tennis, squash, and so on, it provides a very important need to our community. I've done my best with this. I also thought of alternative funding from Homebase. That land comes to us in approximately 7 years' time, at the end of 2030. Hence, that was the reason for my question today. I thought that was the case. I just want to make sure I was right. But even that, it's a long time before we get a return from Homebase. We would have to work it up and so on. And that's a long time for the city to be leasing premises as well. So as I said, I've done my best to really think this out to see if it was plausible to make it active space or passive space. And I'm sorry, I just cannot agree to that. However, a little bit of sunshine for my passionate resident in the North Ward. This is only the beginning of this process. There will be other opportunities for residents to speak up. We have fulfilled our statutory consultation, but it doesn't stop future consultation. Thank you.
Any other speakers on C5? Councillor Burns, did you want to close?
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Mayor McMullen. Look, the point, I'm so glad that the point was raised during statements, and I appreciate the fact that the gentleman stayed to see where we go from here, and I also appreciate the fact he's probably dreadfully disappointed. That probably doesn't make him feel any better. This issue goes beyond. Okay, here's a piece of land. Yes, we could hold it. Yes, and we could do something with it, but it's not big enough that it's particularly appropriate. I suppose the question should be: did we make a mistake in not keeping TAFE, the TAFE property, years ago, and joining the two of them together, and then we would have had something. But it's spilt milk. It has happened, and that's in the past. I think what we need to acknowledge here is that, and it was raised before in the previous item with regard to what's happening at Princess Margaret, but not only that, what's happening at the Gates end of Subiaco Oval, and then after that, what's going to happen all the way down the railway line from the crossing at the end of Subiaco Oval all the way down to Thomas Street, right, is that we need to realise that this is a tsunami that we can see coming. I mean, it's not, tsunamis, it seems an inappropriate word, because usually they're a surprise. But this one is just out there, and it is so obvious. If we were talking a couple of thousand people, we'd be concerned. But, we are talking thousands upon thousands. However, people do need roofs over their head. It is very hard to become undesirable, seeing you can throw a rock to the CBD and we're next to Kings Park and hospitals and everything else. So they will, they're coming, they will come. And it's going to be all but impossible for us to, we can do nothing more than our best, okay, for what our population base is going to be over time. So we march on, and we do our best. We do it with the best intentions, and I'm going to vote. Vote for this. Even if it was a stopgap, I might think about it. But it just doesn't get across the line for consideration, unfortunately, in my opinion. But tomorrow frightens me, and it's coming. So I'll leave it at that and put it in your hands, members. Thank you.
Call the vote. All those in favour of C5? The item is carried unanimously. The next item is C8, a contract termination with an officer recommendation and an amendment submitted by Councillor Hammersley. Can I have a mover and a seconder for the officer recommendation? Councillor De Vries and Councillor Powell. I assume, I'll take the amendment as read because it was submitted with notice. Mover and seconder, are you happy to take the amendment on board? Councillor Hammersley, did you particularly want to speak to the amendment, or happy just to get underway with C5? Okay, we'll take C8 8 as amended as per Councillor Hammersley's amendment, and we'll get on with the debate. Councillor De Vries?
As I understand it, this is something which is important for clarification, and I'm quite happy that Councillor Hammersley speaks to it further. Thank you.
Councillor Powell? Any other speakers to C8? Councillor Hammersley?
I will just speak very briefly, given I'm the chair of the Audit Committee, and I did propose an amendment. It's pretty simple. The staff recommendation told us all what we were doing, and I just added the why we were doing it. So the why is really set out in the staff report. Essentially, our internal audit program has not progressed as expected, and it's been considered by the staff, and I certainly agree that the best thing for Subiaco is to move on and secure some auditing, have a new process, get an internal auditor and get on with the work that we want done, because it's important. So I'm going to be voting for this to get things moving.
Any final speakers about C8 as amended? Councillor De Vries, you can close if you like. I'll call the vote. All those in favour of C8? The item's carried unanimously. That's the end of the public officer reports. There's now a single elected member's motion submitted by Councillor Jennings, but there's a procedural quirk in that Councillor Jennings has worked up a slightly different alternative to the one that was submitted with notice. I'm aware of it because we've had quite a bit of discussion between ourselves, and I understand the alternative was circulated to councillors. Staff, have you seen the alternative form of elected member motion? I'm just wondering if we can even get it up on the screen. Councillor Jennings?
Thank you. I did email to staff, but it was rather late, 4:30. Unless I didn't send it by mistake, but I'll just check.
I think it went to councillors all, but I'll forward it right now. Okay. Well, first things first, I'll ask if there's a mover and a seconder for 11.1 as submitted. I understand it's Councillor Jennings' intention not to move. So unless there's two people who really like the previous form of EMM, we can let it lapse. Councillor Jennings?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't think that is the correct procedure. It actually says that the only person who can move an elected member's motion is the person who submits it, unless they consent to someone else doing that. Anyway.
Okay, well, I take it that if there was someone who wanted to move your EMM, you wouldn't consent to it. Okay, well, 11.1 lapses. I am, however, happy for Councillor Jennings to move her alternative EMM. I'm still looking for it so I can forward it to staff and we can get it up. Okay. Governance, maybe if you could get it up on the screen and then I'll look for a seconder. Okay. Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Hammersley. Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. I did find that email that I sent to staff, just to elected members communication. That was at 434. Okay, I did circulate the revised version to everyone. It was late. It was late-ish, after 3 o'clock sometime. So I hope you might have had time to look at it, and I've circulated a copy now. And I did circulate earlier, maybe last Thursday week, the original version. So what's changed is that I've included from the original version that instructions, staff instructions to our legal advisors, or we would ask the CEO to instruct the lawyers to summarise and confirm the instructions in their legal advice. Secondly, which was in the original, that the staff's instructions are included with the relevant legal advice when it is provided to us, but I have added an exception to that to accommodate, I hope, staff's indications to me throughout the week that they might be under time pressure, particularly at the end, particularly for verbal instructions and questions, to commit those to writing in a form that could then be provided to elected members or the council with the legal advice. So I've tried to provide a mechanism where staff don't have to do that if they are really pressed for time, and those so-called outstanding instructions would be provided subsequently as soon as possible after the advice is provided. And then the third part of the motion is the same as the original motion the draft motion that I put up and circulated some time ago. As to the reasons, I think it's just a check and balance that we see this. We can see where staff have been looking, perhaps if there's any gaps, and it's as far as receiving that at the time we get the advice, and then for the long-term record keeping, to have those instructions filed with the advice in our legal database. That will give context and help anyone reading the advice in the future to understand or better understand possibly the advice and how, the context it was sought, which is always useful. And I note that staff anyway really, I've been told that they create these records as they go along. There might be an initial written brief or instruction, but along the way, when there's more detail added or something's changed, staff would typically keep a note of those kind of instructions and interactions with the legal advisors. And there's no suggestion that it be anything verbatim. It's just the kind of record, I guess, is the summary that staff would normally make of their interactions for their own records. And I guess it's as I say in the reasons, it's a bit of a legacy governance matter, so that future councils can receive all the information that might be relevant to help them in interpreting advice and making the best decision. So I think I'll just leave it there. Thanks.
Councillor Hammersley.
Yeah, I'm prepared to support this. I think it is just in the realm of continuous improvement and just laying down governance structure that will be there when all of us will change, and perhaps all of the people assisting us in the staff change over time as well. And I just think it's good to have these sorts of routine things happening. And, particularly because what we're talking about is the advice that the council sees. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happens that we don't see. But when it gets to the point that it's something that we're seeing, I think it's helpful to basically understand what our agents have been doing for us, because that's really what is going on. I think it's also good in that it minimises the potential that you see from time to time about claims of persuasive briefing. If it's all there and available, first of all, let's hope that it means that people don't make those claims. But secondly, it assists the other elected members to not be persuaded by claims that can be made when there's a vacuum and then there's a whole lot of flurry, and like eventually you might tease it out, but sometimes it's too late. I think that's another good reason for having the material available. It can also, we do know that sometimes in the process of getting to what becomes the final brief, that there are rabbit holes that are run down and run back out of and things like that. And that's actually a good thing. That's a good thing that it happens, but it's also a good thing if the people who the advice is actually for knows that it's happened, so they don't have to worry about, they may themselves run down that rabbit hole, but if it's been done, they can just put that out of their mind and go, okay, yeah. So I think there are some practical advantages, mostly just in that governance space of, continually just making things flow so that when we get to making decisions, we can all see that things have been done to everybody's satisfaction so that they feel ready to make a decision and they're not wrong-footed by disruptors or doubts. And yes, there's a little bit of extra work. I don't see it as too onerous. I personally wouldn't be expecting something particularly elaborate. A bundle of pieces of paper in chronological order on one PDF attached into the database would certainly be enough for me, and I think probably most people. So, these records are all kept. There are pretty strenuous requirements with record keeping anyway, so it's really just putting it all in one place so that anyone that might be interested in burrowing into something has it and doesn't have to ask for it and wait for it. So I think it's got some merit. Once it gets up and running, I think it'll become a good thing. Thank you.
Any other speakers to C5? Councillor De Vries.
Through you, Mayor McMullen. This is just to sort of probably to the CEO, I'm assuming, that the comments by staff in the original EMM were that pretty sort of similar reasons for given that, well, more or less the same reasons that were given in Councillor Jennings' original EMM, but obviously there were concerns around time, particularly towards the time coming closer to the meeting. Does this satisfy, or let's be entering the debate, were those concerns around time towards just coming close to a meeting and then there not being sufficient time, was that the original concern?
CEO.
So when we were going back and forth, what we were trying to describe is circumstances in local government, particularly that really difficult period between agenda briefing and council meeting. And the issue is quite often even just getting our which legal firm we're using, sometimes they're in court, all those sorts of things. So it can be quite an iterative process. And what we were hoping for is that we wouldn't then also, in trying to get everything ready to give elected members the best information as soon as it becomes available, and you don't have to think that far back to remind yourselves in February and March of some challenging times to get information, was more that then we have to sit back and go through all the different emails that might have come from different people to be able to summarise what that might be. So what we're trying to recommend was that bit about if the lawyers could incorporate all that within the in the background and in the questions that were asked, they already do that, then we felt that time pressure would it would all be incorporated in the information that you'd have within that short time frame. So that was sort of our thinking.
I'll speak to support Councillor Jennings. I understand this was done to ensure that there is some protection for us to be able to look at what's gone behind some of the decisions that come to us and understand it better. But also I think there is a legacy issue here and we can't predict the future. There has been nothing to suggest there's any urgency in the last few years, but I think it's a really great way of just keeping councillors comfortable and feeling that they've got the full picture. I also feel that there are sort of mechanisms for quick note-taking. I have to use them in my work, use Notability, so I can just quickly flick it into a PDF format. So there are it's quite a number of different ways we can just put advice notes very quickly into a folder if that's the case. I also feel that it's common practice in every workplace now that record keeping is incredibly important. I'm sure the city's all over it. So it's really probably, as mentioned in the reasons, not further work. And I think it's just improving the governance practices of the city and making us one of the lead councils. So I really do think with that amendment especially, that does satisfy me. And I think it's, definitely worth supporting. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Kosovich.
Thank you, Mayor. With all due respect to Councillor Jennings, I'm at a loss to understand this. I cannot see a demonstrated need or any justification for doing this. It points to a lack of trust of staff, in my view, and I don't want us to go down this path. There must be clear evidence that the system as it is has failed, and I've seen nothing or heard nothing tonight that suggests that is the case. So I would ask people to carefully think this through. We have a CEO, a very competent and good CEO, who manages his staff very effectively. If there are shortfalls in the legal advice, it's in his remit to take that up with the staff and to get onto that legal advice. What are we going to gain from this? I see nothing. I see it's an overlay that is just not necessarily a governance overlay. You can dress it up whatever way you like. But I thought the disappointing thing for me was that I thought the very sensible and voice of reason that I heard or that I saw in an email from Director Wollaston didn't cut across, and it seemed to be dismissed out of hand. I just don't see any reason why we need to go down this path. And I got onto this council because it's been a very good council. It's taken a while. It's 20 months now. We've carefully built up the trust between staff and ourselves. Staff make mistakes, but so do elected members. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm prepared to back the staff in here, and we should always look to them. If they fail, then we take that up again with the CEO. That's his responsibility. So I don't see any justification for this whatsoever, and I'm a strong no against this.
Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor McMullen and councillors. I appreciate Councillor Kosovich's position, but I will say this: it's his position. Okay. Now, I don't think there's anything in this that questions the staff in any way whatsoever. I mean, that's not what's taking place. But to cut to the quick, the more transparency and openness between the elected members and the administration's, sort of, we're almost easier to get to than the administration, because to get to the administration we go through a column, okay? But the staff, really, not all the staff, but it's easier. The other way is almost an easier flow. So, in saying that, it's just nothing is ever going to hurt us by complete openness and clarity about everything. The more there should be no secrets, and if there's no secrets, everything runs smoothly. And I appreciate Councillor Kosovich's support for the staff. It's great. We do our best to support the staff. However, right, if people are scratching their heads publicly, privately, when they can't sleep at night with little questions or whatever else about anything, right? Well, you remove that by clarity and the fact that you can look it up and it's there and it's obvious, and if something does go wrong, it also gives a trace history of what went wrong, okay? It can only benefit us. The only danger, Councillor Kosovic, in my interpretation of what he said, and excuse me, Gary, if I shouldn't be putting words in your mouth, but is that we're showing some disrespect to the staff. Pardon? Yeah, so we're showing some disrespect. But I don't believe I don't see myself or Councillor Jennings's elected members' motion as doing that, because if you look to Councillor Jennings's elected members' motion and what Councillor Hammersley said, right? Remember, we're all going to leave. And I don't mean just this guys, you guys, we all eventually leave, except for me. I've been here since the 80s, okay? I never leave, okay? I'm dying here, right? So, eventually, even Lloyd one day won't be sitting back there. So it's about the history of it and keeping it, and having records and things like that. Nobody's under question. We haven't just come out of some horrible, disaster, and now we're trying to patch it up or whatever else. So, I think Gary's right, but there is no harm at all in the elected members' motion, right? It does no harm. I don't believe it's disrespectful. If it's interpreted by anybody as being disrespectful, I'd be the first to apologise, and I know Councillor Jennings, that's the last thing she would be doing, is disrespecting anybody. So I think it's a good idea. I think it's records, are fabulous, and I support it. But at the same time, I acknowledge the reasoning of Councillor Kosovic's comments. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Powell.
Yes, I almost have a question, if I can, to start with, and this is probably for those legally trained on the council, and that's whether this is pretty well a standard practice in legal briefs, that you have a set of these that you get the set of instructions, and both sides actually have the instructions and then the response to them. Is it pretty well the normal standard way of that would happen in a legal practice?
Well, Councillor Powell, I think that should come out in the debate, and it's pretty implicit in the first two councillors' debates that they think this is normal, and I'll debate this later and tell you my views.
Okay, all right. Look, to me, this is about process, and process is, I think, is always important. Process is the thing that can save you. So this is not about staff or disrespecting staff. This is about having the proper processes in place. And to me, I think that's all this is doing. It's looking at a process and saying this is a good process to follow for when we receive or gain legal advice. So yeah, I'll support it.
Any other speakers? Yeah, I'll enter the debate now. Look, I'm not sure if I'm speaking for or against, because this elected member motion presents a little bit of a dilemma to me as a lawyer and a governance professional, because I don't actually see that there's a problem that needs to be fixed. It is, however, a matter of housekeeping, and I think it's probably a matter of good corporate housekeeping. Given that the topic of governance has been raised, I want to say something about governance, and that is that motions like this are great, and they prepare organisations like ours for a time when the governing body may not be quite as sophisticated and highly functioning as us. I'm patting ourselves on the back now. But what I want to say is that governance at its core is a virtuous cycle of respect, trust and candour. It's a two-way street between the governing body and our executive. And when that trust is lost, that's when governance breaks down, and no resolution in the world could fix that. Fortunately, we're not in anywhere near that kind of position at the moment, but we're preparing for a rainy day. Now, I wouldn't have voted for the elected member motion in its current form because, in my view, it was too rigid, but in its amended form, which we're now debating, I think this is quite a workable solution that can provide some good checks and balances for the City of Subiaco. The key for me is point 2, which recognises that there are going to be times when a copy of instructions to lawyers may have to follow after the provision of legal advice. Now, if you read my email to all of you about this during the week, I'm talking about situations where we can't have the provision of legal advice held up because we're waiting for staff to produce copies of file notes and records of instructions that have been given to lawyers. Good governance is a nice thing and it's an important thing, but it can't hold up the functioning of the organisation. Unfortunately, in the form we're now debating, I think this strikes the right balance. Now, having said earlier that I consider governance to be a two-way street, the flow and effect of that is that we are in a position where if this doesn't work, I can have a conversation with the CEO and he'll tell me if it's not working, but I don't think we need to preempt problems. There does seem to be a lot of good that can come out of this, and I particularly liked the observation that by having all the available information, we can make up our own minds about the quality of instructions that are being given to lawyers, and we're not left guessing or speculating as to the basis on which advice is being given. So look, I'd say let's try this. I'm supportive of any initiative to improve good governance as long as it doesn't get in the way of the organisation itself, and I think this just gets us there, and if it doesn't, we'll be having a conversation and we'll work out what to do about it. I'm left a little bit puzzled about why we focus so much on legal advice though, and I just wonder whether we need to start looking at all the briefs to town planners and accountants as well, but one thing at a time. We'll get our legal house in order and we'll get this process right, and then maybe there'll be some learnings that we can apply elsewhere. So I think I spoke for the amendment in what started as a fairly lukewarm kind of way, but I hope I warmed up to it because I think it's something worth trying. Any final speakers? Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you for not doing an old trick of the past Mayor of being the last to speak, because on something like this it is really useful to hear your views, but particularly when this has been a last-minute change to an elected member's motion, and you nabbed me for being a bit irregular tonight on an incy-wincy advice note, and this is a much bigger consideration without any staff comment to it, and I'm left still a little bit confused. So I actually have a question first. Thank you, and I don't know how to do this. Maybe you can answer it without staff entering into the debate. From my understanding, and I appreciate that Councillor Jennings has been working on this to and fro for a long time, but we have had this elected members motion in print sitting at us, you know, over the weekend and so on, and we do have a staff comment which shows concern. So it's my understanding that this last minute elected members motion that came in this afternoon is to sort of help with the staff's concerns and comments and therefore make it a more workable action. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, it is in response to the types of comments that had been raised in relation to the original elected members motion. I think it's worth asking the CEO if this is a solution that is able to be implemented. I think that's a valid question, and it can be answered in a way that doesn't enter into the debate. So, CEO, is this something that you think can be implemented?
I suppose the proof of the pudding's always in the eating. So, as I said, what we're trying to work on is how we can make sure that timely advice is still sought, and that has happened in lots of different ways. Sometimes by elected members ringing us and saying, "Has this been thought of?" And so when you've got a lot of different people trying to get that information, the issue was around the time pressure. So if we're certainly able to summarise that, but still get the advice to you as soon as possible, because the biggest concern that I have is that we don't get that information to you, and then that is the reason why you may need to defer consideration. But if you don't have the information, as I always say to you, you should defer consideration. So it's always that time pressure of us making sure we've given you the information that you seek in order to make your decision. I hope I've answered that question.
Another question, thank you, Mayor. The advice that we receive does include the brief. It says, you know, I have been asked to da-da-da-da-da, and it usually lists it all on what they've been asked to do. So where is the difference between the lawyer summarising the brief at the beginning of the advice and the staff giving us their notes on the brief to the lawyer? Thank you.
I prefer not to get staff to answer that one. The simple answer is that the original instructions are the source material, whereas the lawyer's summary of the instructions is their interpretation, and sometimes it will capture everything that's been instructed to them, sometimes it won't.
Thank you, Mayor. That helps me a lot between the source and the interpretation. Okay, that's good. So I appreciate that this issue, I'll get into the debate now. I appreciate this issue has been a long time coming, and unfortunately it does come from a bit of a shady past of where there was a breakdown in trust and understanding of what was being briefed and what we were being received and so on. I don't see there's been that practice at all under the new regime of new Mayor or a new CEO, but as it has been suggested this evening, there is no harm in putting good practice in place, if that's what we achieve through this, in case we have a different sort of mayor and CEO in the future. I don't necessarily see it as extra work for staff. I see it more as a discipline, and a discipline that will just define a pattern of behaviour that will just become hopefully very procedural. And in that discipline, maybe, you know, it helps the staff to just think it out a bit more about what they're asking, because they know it will also come back to elected members. It might help them to think a little smarter so on. Not suggesting they don't, but you know what I'm suggesting when you have to give that little bit more thought. So yeah, it applies certain discipline, pattern of behaviour, and certainly is just that layer of more openness and transparency that we expect elected members to give to the community, and in turn we are asking this openness and transparency towards elected members. So I'm happy to vote for this elected members' motion, amended motion. Thank you.
Councillor Kosovich, I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. A question, if I may, please, and it's possibly more for the CEO. In other local governments and other LGAs across the state, is this recognised as best practice? Is this a one-off, or can you lead us on that, please?
So I worked in 4 local governments, so I can't comment on what is best practice, but as has been discussed, it is quite common to include a summary of a summary in the advice in the background, a summary of the brief, and then the questions that are pertinent. So that is the standard sort of practice.
Any final speakers? Councillor Jennings, do you want to close?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to address a few things that were raised in all the debate. The CEO said that it might be a bit tricky or burdensome for people to staff to have to pull out, extract from their files the relevant instructions. Well, I guess without telling staff how to suck eggs, that's pretty easily done by compiling the instruction folder or whatever from the get-go, knowing that has to be done. So that hopefully should not create a whole layer of extra work by a staff member to do that, although there will have to be some sort of copying of those instructions somehow for provision to council or elected members. As to the issue of trust in general, governance does rely on trust, but also we should have processes and procedures in place when they are not too burdensome or costly for an organisation. They don't gum up the works. You put processes in and procedures in place that try to encourage the best behaviour and help to avoid misunderstandings, clear communication, everyone's on the same page, everyone knows what they're doing. So its governance is reliance on trust is kind of it's frequent, but it's also not the most desirable aspect of governance. It's necessary, but if you can put a process in place to make sure things happen correctly or achieve whatever the objective is, that's what you should do, as long as it's not too burdensome or expensive to do that. Councillor Kosovich made a couple of comments that I dismissed Director Wollaston's comments or statements or discussions along the way about staff's position out of hand. Well, I reject that entirely. Except for the last email that the Director sent me, which I discussed with her in person, I responded in writing and I tried to rebut any arguments with facts and logic, and also my experience with law and also on council and what goes on and how things could go on. So I absolutely reject that I dismissed anything out of hand. As to the motivation for me doing this, again alleged by Councillor Kosovich, that it's a lack of trust of staff. Well, I don't think any councillor should be attributing motives that have not been stated or are not contained in, or they're unaware of that, and it's mere conjecture. So I object to that and find it quite offensive. I've said in my reasons that I did not, there's no question of trust with current staff, actually state that. There's been nothing that leads me to think any of the behaviours that may have occurred in the past are happening now. So it's not about not trusting staff. And I also explain in all my reasons, there's a whole lot of reasons there about why this would be a good measure in terms of governance. And without going back into that, I don't need to go back into that. It's all there as to why it's going to be, I hope, a good thing, and won't be of any detriment. And yes, I thank the Mayor's comments that if in the end it does gum up the works, we'll all be reasonable, and we will trust in that instance that we will all be reasonable and be able to communicate with each other if things are not working as anticipated or hoped. As just the final point about when local governments do other councils know the instructions? Well, I'm not sure that they do, because probably they don't ever think to ask for them. But if you think of the situation between a normal individual client and their lawyer, well, the client always knows the instructions because they give them. Council does not give the instructions, but there's nothing wrong with us actually being privy to those and knowing what those instructions are. And that's what this achieves, I guess. So I recommend my EMM to you, and thanks for the good debate. Thank you, staff, for all your input during the week. It's been quite a lot of work. I appreciate it. Thanks.
I'll call the vote. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried 8-1. Councillor Kosovich voting against. Councillors, that's the end of the items that we're going to debate in public. And there's no urgent business that I'm aware of. Therefore, I'll be looking for a mover and a seconder for a procedural motion. We're going to do a ceremonial lowering of the flags later, so Mr. Gorman, it would be great if you'd hang around until we've discussed all 4 confidential items to capture the moment, and we'd really like to read about it in this week's post. If it's okay with you, Councillor Burns, I'll ask for a mover and a seconder for the procedural motion. We're going to go behind closed doors pursuant to 7.1H of the meeting procedures so that we can discuss 4 confidential items which are confidential for reasons of commercial sensitivity and the discussion of legal advice and also the personal affairs of a person. A mover and a seconder for the procedural motion, please. Councillor Burns and Councillor De Vries. All those in favour? The procedural motion's carried, so we'll go behind closed doors. Okay, behind closed doors, council's... Now we're out from behind closed doors. Council's resolved 4 items as follows. On 13.1, Council has resolved that the City of Subiaco supports the redevelopment of land in the Seddon Street precinct in accordance with the applicable local planning framework and in a manner which protects, incorporates and celebrates heritage values important to the community, and the Mayor and Chief Executive Officer are authorised to enter into negotiations to assist in facilitating development outcomes and heritage protections envisaged in the City of Subiaco's planning framework. On 13.2, it was resolved that the City of Subiaco recommends that the Western Australian Planning Commission does not proceed with the proposed improvement plan 450 Hayes Street, Subiaco. The background and initial improvement plan consideration sections of this report are made public. On 13.3, it was resolved that in accordance with section 11.2F of the Local Government Functions and General Regulations, Council authorises the Chief Executive Officer to execute the contract with the preferred digital transformation vendor outlined in the officer's recommendation contained in option 1 of this report. And on 13.4, it was resolved as follows. A panel of elected members be appointed to guide the Chief Executive Officer's 2022-2023 performance review and to recommend to Council the CEO's performance criteria for the 2023-2024 period. The panel consists of the following elected members: Mayor David McMullen, Councillor Rosemary De Vries, Councillor Simon White, and Councillor Mark Burns. Steve Cartledge Consulting be appointed as a consultant to work with the panel to facilitate the CEO performance review process and the setting of the performance criteria for the next 2 years. Councillors, there's no further business, so I declare the City of Subiaco Ordinary Council meeting of 30 May 2023 closed at 9:29 p.m. Thanks, everyone.